Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you both Mayor Lorden and Mayor Rogers. My name is Mike Randall. I'm going to be facilitating this discussion on housing, and I'm going to call back up Mayor Rogers, our host mayor from the city of Fredericton. I'll call back up Saillant, our economist, and also joining us on stage today will be George Cormier. He is the transitioning out executive director of the New Brunswick Nonprofit Housing Association and soon to be the new managing director of the Transitional Affordable Housing Initiative in Southeastern New Brunswick, Rising Tides, and Willy Scholten, representing the New Brunswick Landlords Association. Good afternoon to all four of you, and thanks to each of you for joining us. Mayor Rogers, I'm going to start with you, and thank you so much for the overview of what Fredericton is doing and how you're starting to address this challenge. But are we in a crisis today in New Brunswick as it relates to housing?
I feel that we're in a crisis. Yes, no, it keeps me up at night. It's funny. I just sat down and we both said that this is the issue that keeps me up at night as a mayor, because I know that we don't have housing for the people in our community, but not just, and then it's even made worse by the fact it's not just the residents in our community, but it's also the types of residents in our community, whether it be single moms or seniors, or whether it's the new families who are coming, immigrants who are coming here, whether it be students or those who've just been living on the fringes all along. And so when you want to create an inclusive municipality and you don't have housing that can house everyone, that you only have housing, I'm fine. I have a roof over my head. To Richard's point, the wealthy in our community are going to be just fine. I worry about those who maybe don't have the voice also to advocate, and that's our job, is to do that for them. So yes, I feel that it is at a crisis point. The opportunity there, though, like I said, is once you accept that and take ownership of it, that removes a little bit of my stress. I'm more stressed about the things that I can't play a role in making change, where I can't play a role in making change, and we have an opportunity to play a role here. So that's the only bright shining light there.
I think one of the phrases as elected municipal officials that you become very familiar with is, it may not be our responsibility, but it is our problem. And that's one that I think all elected officials at a municipal level need to remember every single day. Rashad, the numbers are alarming in some ways. We've seen similar cycles in our history before. Are we in crisis today?
Well, I'm not entirely sure that we've seen similar crises on the housing front in this province, but maybe Willy will have a better answer than I do about the data. But from what I'm seeing there, at least in the past, we were not constrained by our demography and our ability to respond. That's my sense. And I would say that with regards to the crisis, it depends on who you are, as Mayor Rogers just said, but fundamentally we have an inequality issue here that is brewing up, and it pits what's the new chief of the conservative party called the have-nots and the have-yachts. I'm just kidding, but at the same time, I do really feel that the biggest threat to our future prosperity, because for the first time in our modern history in New Brunswick, our greatest challenge is no longer to create jobs for people who are available to work, but to actually find workers for the jobs that are becoming available. And that's a lovely challenge to have, but it comes with its share of issues, of growing pains, if you want. And if we don't deal with this housing issue in a fair and balanced way, and I would suggest that the biggest priority is on probably the labor supply front, it's the very receptiveness of New Brunswickers towards that agenda for demographic growth that could be jeopardized, because at some point people are going to start asking, why is it that we're faced with this situation? And if we can't deal with it, shouldn't we slow down? And that's what amount to shooting ourselves in the foot in terms of our ability to allow people to age in dignity in this province and to grow our economic potential. But it is a risk.
George, you spent a good chunk of the last decade really putting forward policy ideas and putting forward the belief that, as the United Nations says, housing is a human right, and we need housing for everyone. Are we in crisis in New Brunswick?
Yes, we are. First, before I go too far with my answer, is there anybody from the provincial government in the room?
I should say just we did invite Minister Shepherd to participate today, and she was unable to join us. So
Okay. So you will remember last year, the provincial government did a 90-day review on housing. And it was internal. And the conclusion was, we do not have a housing crisis in New Brunswick. Well, I can tell you that today, as we speak, 13 provincial departments are scrambling on how to deal with the housing crisis in New Brunswick a year after we did not have a housing crisis. So yes, we do have a housing crisis in New Brunswick. It does not affect every demographic the same way. So we don't have a housing crisis for high-end units, for retired baby boomers that have nice pensions or others that have money. But we do have a housing crisis for the working poor, for homeless individuals, for single moms, for a whole bunch of families, for newcomers. Like some of the conditions that newcomers are forced to live in, it's not very good. So overcrowding, like there's a lot of stuff going on. So yes, we have a housing crisis in New Brunswick.
Willy, some months ago, I guess over a year ago now, you and I had a lovely conversation around municipal reform and inclusionary zone, and we talked about some of the challenges that apartment owners are facing in the province of New Brunswick and how you'd like to do more, but it's challenging in this environment and in this province. You come at this from the other side of the equation, but I think, you know, maybe more aligned than anyone would realize. Are we in a crisis today?
Yeah, I think we are absolutely in a crisis. I know everybody is dealing with it day in and day out in the municipalities. We have housing from a developer standpoint for houses. We've stopped building custom houses because we don't know when we can get things, how much they're going to cost, and it's tough to have a customer that you tell that we can't tell you what it's going to cost and when it'll be done, but will you let us build that for you? So from that perspective, our custom home business is basically dried up on a spec home basis. We've got houses with windows boarded in because we can't get windows. And if we can't get windows, we can't move on to the next level. And labor is, as Richard mentioned, labor is holding up everything from apartments to houses to what have you. We simply don't have enough. And the ones that we do have are aging with the population, and there's not enough feeder going into that as far as adding to the labor. But in terms of crisis, I would say the bigger crisis is on the rental homes. We would say a healthy market would be a 3 to 5% vacancy rate, and we've got 1.2 in the province. That's a crisis, and that's not going to get better. I see it getting worse because I think from a developer standpoint, our costs have not adjusted, and yet our interest rates since February alone have gone up 3%. So that to a developer is very, very scary. And they're still talking about doing more increases in interest rates. So yeah, absolutely. I think it's a supply and demand issue. The taps are not turned off as far as increasing our population. They're only getting turned up higher, and yet we don't have the houses. And I tend to take it from a different perspective that all housing is good housing. Building affordable housing for us nowadays is extremely challenging. We don't build high-end units because we want to. We build high-end units because we have to. We've got, I'm talking about our company, Colpitts here in town. We grew our business in building workers, rentals. So not high-end units. We built for the working population, and that's how we grew our business. Now we've got a machine that we need to continue to feed, which means we have to keep building or we have to lay off people, and we don't want to do that. So the only thing that we can build, we're already getting in the ground, putting the framing in with the costs that we have. We're already up into that luxury range. So we have to put the higher end finishes. We just have no choice to do that. But my issue is that municipalities and politicians and the general public may look at that as a negative when we really feel that it's all part of the rental continuum. If we're not building those, we're not building anything, because we can't, we have to pay our bills. And if we can't pay our bills, we can't build. And if we don't add units, then the whole rental continuum suffers because those units are not there that could have been there. So I think that's an important point to make.
So let me ask you this, and I'm going to go in reverse, and I want to go back down the line. But when you start to talk about the fact that after you've bought a property and you've excavated and you've poured a foundation, you're already in the luxury price range. When you start to look at the fact that we're under provincially 2% and under 1% in some of our CMAs, when you start to see that, I checked the by names list for Fredericton, St. John, and Moncton alone, and we're, chronic and non-chronic homeless, we are somewhere in excess of 600 or 700 people across the province. Identified that, from an emergency shelter perspective, because winter is coming, we're short hundreds of units. From a transitional and affordable housing perspective, we're short hundreds of units, yet you can't afford to build them cheaper. What's the solution?
I think the solution is more. We need to encourage any and all development. Like the gentleman said, the mayor of Miramichi, just getting development is a key part. I don't think that's a problem for Miramichi. I think that's a problem for all of New Brunswick. Before we can get to the problem of labor, we need to be building more. And I've been told a lot along the way from or seeing stories that just walk down the street, there's lots of buildings going up. It's not enough. There's a discrepancy in the amount of people and the amount of construction that's happening. How do we build for more affordable? I think we need to subsidize it. I think we need to have all levels of government helping make it happen. We need to bring down those costs of constructions, and I think all government needs to do that. But what we're seeing is quite the opposite. This year, assessments on our properties went up on average 30%. Only after tremendous lobbying and after we already got our bills and a lot of us already having to pay our bills, the province came in and put a 10% cap on. Well, a 10% cap on our properties assessments, that's too much. I mean, that in itself is, we've never had 10% increases in property taxes. And yet the expectation is that we can run properties cheaper and we can build affordable housing and come out of the gate with things like that when we're hearing a lot of talk about supporting affordable housing, but more than the talk, we need to have actions that support that.
So let me get George in here. So
Yeah,
what do we
sure.
do, George?
Yep.
Well, he's partially right. You need more incentives. You need more grants. I don't think housing is a jurisdictional issue. Like, it's not CMHE and it's not social development. I think it's everybody's problem. I think everybody has to contribute something, including municipalities, and it is happening, but it's going to have to happen more. Now, Willy might not like me for this, but I'm still going to say it.
That's why I sat them beside each other. Just a little bit of excitement before you go home.
So, you know, like Richard said, we were sort of late feeling the rise in prices and all that. Well, the closest municipality to the southern municipalities in New Brunswick is Halifax. They started facing this a few years ago. And every word that's been said here today, inclusionary zoning, increasing density, whatever, they decided they were going to take advantage of what they were going to incentivize the density, but also tax it. Okay, so what they did is they said, okay, you can have more density here. However, so many of the units are going to have to be affordable. So more density, I mean, more density means you're not developed. If you got to do 400 units before you had to do 10 buildings, now you don't have to do 5. Lowers cost for the developer, right? So then they said, okay, so much. Now, if you don't want to do the affordable units, you pay so much into an affordable housing fund that the city is managing, right? So they're still getting the end result of getting affordable housing developed. I think that model is something that should be looked at, because I know some municipalities are looking at increasing density. And well, if you're going to do that, try to get some benefits from it as well, like that model in Halifax. So I think that's one of the things that could be done. I think the province needs to step up and put more money into housing. I mean, it's one thing to announce surpluses every year, make a big press conference about it, but listen, like, we've got 2 problems, big problems in New Brunswick right now. They both start with H. One is housing, the other one is health, and the province needs to invest in those more than they're investing right now.
Is that it, Richard? We need more investment from the province, or is it?
There's another H that's let's call it H2B, which is homelessness. And it's part of housing, but honestly, you know, you talked about Halifax and Charlottetown is essentially us a couple of years from now, okay? And right now, if you look at CBC, there was news, there was a solution, not a solution, but they're building modular places to home the homeless in Halifax and in Charlottetown for the winter. So I tend to separate homelessness from housing generally, because if we had the willingness as a society and all levels of government to make sure that people are going to be not homeless, and okay, I understand that homelessness has to do with much more than simply a roof, but we could be doing a lot more and wouldn't be all that costly. But in terms of the overall issue, that I agree fully with what you said, Willie, in the sense that the developers will focus where the returns are greatest. And if you want to migrate the crews from one segment to another, you need to subsidize. But fundamentally, think about it this way. The government of Canada says that we need to double our housing construction activity to meet the needs of the future. And New Brunswick's population is growing faster than Canada's. So I don't suspect that our needs are lower anymore, because our housing market is even tighter than the Canadian average. So my question would be the following. Individually, we can all think about moving forward with a development and say, we'll find the labor, because that's one project moving forward. Think about scaling up across our communities over the entire province. And now let me know how many laborers will be short. And that's the challenge that we may be facing if we agree with the federal government. So we need to think in terms of scaling up, that something that goes way beyond the margins. And unless we address the labor issue, I don't see any way out of this other than just subsidizing so that baby boomers wishing to sell their bungalow will be on a waiting list to get a fancier apartment. Okay, so to me, I agree that then there's a chicken or the egg issue of how do you own those, how do you oust those who are going to build your houses? Fair enough, but we need to start thinking seriously about that.
Sure.
And there's might be modular solution. There must be ways to move forward on that, but we need to acknowledge that this is probably the big bottleneck right now, because we need to think in terms of scale across the province. Now, the issue of Mayor Lorden alluded to that, and I alluded to that earlier on, is that when we look at our needs in 2035 and beyond, maybe they're not all the same across the province. But as a society, if we don't deal with this as a society, there'll be a rising pitting of the 3 CMAs against the rest of the province in terms of our diverging growth patterns. And I don't think pitting the north against the south is necessarily a solution to this challenge. So we need to think creatively about what do we want as a society, as opposed to just what is profitable from a market standpoint. I don't know the answer to that, but it's high time that we start debating it.
So, Your Worship, we need greater incentivization. We need different policies and greater densification. We need more labor. And as the mayor of our capital city, you also need to address a continuum of housing needs, from emergency to transitional to affordable to functional. We need to grow our population. The goal is another 200,000 people by 2030. Where does the answer lie?
And we need to do it in areas where we have authority. That's the other challenge for municipalities too. And that's a for real thing. But an area where we do have authority, which addresses some of this, is in housing typology, I believe. So I think we also need to maybe be rethinking the types of houses and the types of housing that is being built. So when I talked earlier about the zoning, and our authority lies within our zoning and our bylaws. So the city of Fredericton, for instance, developed a single room occupancy zoning bylaw with the idea. So we're trying to be encouraging people to think about the opportunity of living differently. Fredericton, like many of our cities, was built on this concept of single family dwellings. You know, all of our neighborhoods throughout the city. I was speaking with Councillor Lejeune, who serves on our housing committee, and we were talking about, when you think of the neighborhoods in Fredericton, and I would encourage all of you to think about the neighborhoods in your cities, most of them are premised on a plot of land with a house, and that's what it looks like to be housed. Or maybe on the outskirts someplace, there are a whole bunch of apartment buildings, and you can go there if you can't get a house. Like, that's essentially the way that all of our cities were built. We now need to imagine that ideal living could potentially be, we all have our own single rooms with bathrooms and even a little mini kitchenette, but we have shared common space and shared land and we really need to be encouraging different housing types, or whether that be a more modular home, the more tiny housing units. We're building a neighborhood in Fredericton, the 12 Neighbors community, that is going to be 96 tiny homes built around a social enterprise common space area. That is something that we wouldn't have envisioned. We wouldn't have imagined that 5 years ago, I don't even think, in our community, but we're doing it now as a solution to some of the housing challenges that we're experiencing. We need people to know that it might be ideal for them to share their plot of land with a couple of other homes on the same plot of land. Like, it's not the way we've ever thought in New Brunswick, but certainly throughout the country and definitely throughout the world, they have imagined land use in a different way. So as a city, we see opportunity in land use planning. How can we optimize land use planning? And as for the labor shortage, now being one of the larger cities, a lot of people migrate to our cities, which is good and brings challenges as well, but it's still not enough. And so we need to be much more laser focused on immigration. I don't feel that the cities some cities at varying levels are involved in immigration. Fredericton, for one, hasn't embraced it enough. We have left it to the provincial government, and that hasn't brought us the results that we want in our city. And we need to be more focused on that. I think we can also do a better job at promoting. Being a city where there are lots of post-secondary institutions, have we been promoting the work that happens at our colleges to the same extent as what we have at our universities? I'm not so sure we have, but that's where a lot of the magic is happening right now for the trades that we need. So those are the kinds of things we need to take a very holistic, broad-reaching approach to it. But I think that there are some of the things that we can do to move the needle.
Do you think cities can remain sitting back saying this is a provincial issue, and recognizing, look, you talked this morning about equalization payment cuts and all of the other things. It's sort of top-down economics, but can you afford to do more as a city today, or can you afford not to do more as a city today?
So first of all, I'm not patient enough to wait for the province. We've all waited for the province for long enough. And they're facing their own challenges, right? So again, it's sort of economies of scale. Fredericton is positioned to take on some of this work because of what we will see. I mean, we are a growing city. It comes with our housing market is skyrocketing. We will see increase in assessments, as many of the mayors of the cities have pointed out. We'll use most of that money addressing the challenges that come with growth, but we are positioned to take on some of this work from a financial perspective, but also because we have the players in our city. We do have developers. Fredericton is very fortunate that a lot of our development community is actually made up of local developers who care. And I say that with all sincerity. Not all of the cities have that opportunity, but we have developers who actually do want to be part of the solution. We've had different types of housing, taken on different housing strategies. We embraced housing first. Well, we had developers who bought into that program, Colpitts Developments being one. So I feel we have a development community that is willing to participate to the extent that they want. They have a for-profit model that is fair, that's how their businesses operate. But I think that there is something that can be offered if we compare them up with, in the right way. So I do feel that that we are positioned to take on some of this work in housing in particular. We are not mental health and substance abuse disorder that's creating some of the high acuity homelessness, 171 in Fredericton for whom we have no housing. We don't have the type of housing. We cannot take that on. We have no levers to pull. But housing municipalities can, because of our land use planning, because of our connections with the development community. In Fredericton, because of and many of the cities, the nonprofit housing community, I think that we can make moves in this area and they can have the kinds of outcomes we want. The one thing that nobody has talked about that I feel we must talk about is cooperative housing. No one in our province has seized cooperative housing to the extent that we could to yield the sort of response we want. The best way to control housing prices, I think, is to own. I appreciate not everyone can own their own, but maybe in a cooperative model, we can have some developments where people have control over expenses and they're just able to function in such a way that there's built-in affordability because of the model of housing. So housing typology model, and that I think that there's opportunity there that we haven't fully uncovered or really talked about a lot as a province.
And I'll come back to cooperative housing in a second, because it was a fantastic model in the 70s that CMHC embraced and endorsed fully and have fully abandoned since for a bunch of reasons. But Rashad, you say that the challenge stems in lack of labor, and if I asked Willy, he would probably say finding enough labor to build is tough. Yet the province releases its priorities from an immigration attraction perspective, and construction is not on that list. It's healthcare, it's IT, right? And so where's the gap? Why are we missing this? The numbers seem pretty clear. Why Mayor Rogers said she wished when she was on council years ago, they got glimpses of this happening. Wish we'd caught it sooner, wish we'd addressed this sooner. The numbers are very, very clear. Why aren't we running out and trying to attract as many immigrants, laborers, construction workers as we can?
There's an old saying that there's the worst thing that you can do when you're a seafarer is to try to get your destination based on a map that no longer applies. And New Brunswick does a lot of this. We're no longer a province that needs to manage decline. We need to start investing in growth. Our province this year, I wouldn't be surprised that unless it starts spending, would generate another record surplus. Okay, we've had 135. They're saying that this one's for real. It'll be 135 or something like that. I don't believe that. It'll probably be $500 million if we don't invest more. Every time you welcome a family of 4 new immigrants, newcomers in New Brunswick, equalization, federal health transfer, Canada social transfer, $4,000 per person, $16,000 per year in extra revenues that you would not have otherwise. We need to start recognizing that in order to make money, we need to invest money. And the key bottleneck right now is housing. So we're going to need to spend a few dollars in order to secure our growth. Same thing applies to immigration. If we have a mentality that the market will take care of things because the market is some sort of God that will deliver the outcomes, you know what? Yes, the market is a fantastic thing, but what the market does is balance supply and demand. And one of the ways in which you balance supply and demand when your supply is constrained is by prices going through the roof. So therefore, we need to understand that the market needs help. And the biggest help we can provide other than investments is figuring out ways to get more people working in the industry right now. But if we just believe that somehow the market always is right and will respond eventually, the labor will flow. In the 1970s, in the 2000s, when we looked at the chart, the market was following, but the labor was there. Now our society is aging and we have needs across the board, not just in healthcare. Well, this one here, as long as we believe that somehow it's just a matter of time, supply will catch up, then it's magical thinking. And I think that we have the wrong mental map. Sorry, I tend to philosophize about those things, but I truly believe that we're thinking about the problem as a province based on our old outlook. And the reality changed before our very eyes, barely a few years ago.
George, you've argued that by letting the market manage itself, we've gotten to unaffordable housing costs in our province, and you've lobbied hard for rent control and caps on rent increases to prevent people from losing affordable housing. The other side of that conversation, obviously, is by doing that, you're limiting potential growth, which we also need. So is it the carrot or the stick we need here in the province of New Brunswick?
Well, actually, it's not limiting growth because the rental cap does not apply to new units. So you can set whatever rent you want for new units. But what's happening is, like, I get emails every day. I get emails. I got an email from somebody from Fredericton saying 3.8% was respected, just got a notice, March 1st next year, my rent's going up by 50%, right? So they can't afford that, right? So where are they going to go? Do you have a place for them? Right? So, I mean, so
No, they're being
this
rented out as
is
SRO.
happening. So the market's going to take care of it. I mean, I think we've got enough proof to see that the market is not taking care of it. It's not, because whether it be labor, whether it be prices, I mean, the escalating home prices is creating more pressure on the rental market. First-time home buyers are priced out of the market now, right? So where are they going to live? More demand on rental units. So that doesn't help. We can't build enough already. We're short. So there needs to be more investment. Everybody needs to work together, whether they be private developers, not-for-profits, municipalities, the province, the federal government. We need to find solutions and quickly, because it's just getting bad out there. It's getting bad.
So Willy, what's the answer? What would the developers and apartment owners say? Let us manage the market; it will take care of itself, or what is the answer?
Well, let me respond first to the comment that it doesn't affect new construction. Rent controls affects new construction. You can set your rental rates from day one, but a lot of people are building units and they don't know yet what their costs are going to be. And we set the rental rates at that time. And then the next year we have inflation of 8%. So to be clear, rent caps affect existing landlords and new construction. But on the rent control, our association, myself personally, I have no problem with rent control if you can control the cost to operate the rental units. Right now, we have a situation where our rents are capped at 3.8%, and we're not immune to inflation. Our inflation is 8.1%. Well, in the building industry, it's more than 8.1%, and yet our rents are capped. And that's the problem that I have with rent controls. It's if the government will stop increasing electricity and water and so on, if we can control the building material cost and the labor cost, then it'll make sense. But right now you're creating a eroding bottom line of the eroding, sorry, of a landlord, and that's not good either, because it's just going to make people do things like move to Airbnb because that's not regulated, or developers will just not build those anymore. And it's happened I gather to say that wherever rent controls have been put in place, rent supply suffers. And we can't have rent supply suffer in New Brunswick. So rent controls, I don't think, are the answer. Before rent controls were put in, though, the province put in a mechanism for the tenant tribunal to, if there was an increase of 50%, like you say, then the tenant could go to the tribunal and say, this isn't fair. And the tribunal had the sole right to say, you're right, that's not fair. The rental rate needs to be different. And that wasn't even given a chance. We just went straight to rent controls in probably an inflationary time that's never been higher. So it's really about creating the balance, and we need to find creative solutions to that as well. And that was one. Give the province some credit here. That was one that was never given a chance. But we're not, the vast majority of landlords, and I feel that landlords in the province have been really put into one basket, and the media is not helping with that, because these stories that are being told over and over again, the same story 10 times. And the vast majority of landlords didn't do that. We had an element that came into our province that I too wish they would just go back to where they came, because they're not good. They're not looking at customers, tenants like we look at them. They're our customers, they're our lifeblood, and they're the ones that are paying our bills and making sure that we can run a business. So the problem is we've put a overriding control on everybody when these bad performers or actors came into our market. Let's be more targeted. Let's be smarter than that.
George, you're about to take over an organization. For those that aren't familiar with Rising Tides, it's a nonprofit housing organization based in southeastern New Brunswick, received funding from the city of Moncton and from the province of New Brunswick to initially build 147 units, transitional housing based on a housing first model. And at the time, those funding applications came through, I think it was somewhere around $70,000 to $80,000 a unit. Today, 2.5 years later, and full transparency, I co-chair the Greater Moncton Homelessness Steering Committee, so I deal with this every day. But this week we learned that the Rising Tide unit cost per unit cost now is about $120,000. How do you balance that with the idea of rent control, and when you see that kind of extraordinary cost increase, how do you balance these two things?
So Rising Tide hasn't yet felt that increase because there was federal money that was injected into the program. And so that federal money offset those increased per unit costs. Moving forward, if there's no federal money for every project, the original business plan cost per unit is going to be challenging. And to get to the same unit results. However, there's still potential for federal money to be injected in the Rising Tide projects. So it's going to be, let's follow this closely and see what's happening. And, you know, there might be a case, and we are already making cases with the province that, you know, those are 2019 uninflated dollars, right? So now we're in 2022, and we know what's happened with inflation. So we might use some of the affordable rental housing program dollars as well on projects, just to make sure it evens out.
I mean, I'm hearing a lot, Richard. I'm hearing a lot of we need more money. We need more input money from the feds, from the province. We need money from the municipalities or land or incentivization of some sort. I keep thinking there's only one taxpayer. And so how do we balance all of this? If it's more that we need, are we just going to continue to raise taxes to try to buy this problem to go away?
Could I take a different slant on that for a minute? Is that on? Yeah. We don't need more, but we don't need to charge more when we're building properties either. I don't know if anybody knows this, but when we finish a project, we have to self-assess our HST on the property and pay that to the government. I just wrote a check for $1.2 million on a project that we're doing, a 43 unit in Uptown Fredericton. We have to pay HST. Other businesses do not get HST back. When rental properties get charged HST, we don't get it back. So 7, 8 years ago, 6 years ago, when we were building projects, they may have cost $150,000, $160,000. Now they're $260,000. So that the governments are now getting $100,000 more of HST on that. So that's artificially increasing it. So we're not talking about necessarily reducing taxes. Why don't we get the same dollars that we got before and encourage housing? Why does the government of New Brunswick charge 10% of that 15% and not give a housing rebate like some other provinces do? So that I'm sure, I don't think I've ever said that to anybody. We live with it every day, but I assume that most people here don't understand that. And it's the same thing with municipalities. When we build, it's $8 per $1,000 of value when we build of our cost. Well, that's $8 on more $1,000 now because it costs more to build. Why is that $8 still the standard? You don't have to get more, bring it down to $6. You're still getting the same dollars you got before, but the values have gone up. Why do assessments go up? If assessments go up, tax rates should come down. We don't have to get more tax dollars, but we do. And all of that is, it's kind of turned a blind eye to, and it's just added costs to actually get these housing products out there so we can house our people. So maybe it's not incentivizing, maybe it's, let's start to not reap additional tax dollars from this sector. Maybe we can bring it back down.
I'm just going to let Richard jump in here.
Yeah.
Well, just to go quickly to the question of there's only one taxpayer, the short answer to that is that Canada will grow by about what, 250,000 people this year. New Brunswick's growing by 14,000 people. So that's probably 7,000 more taxpayers right there. But the reality is that anytime you have a price escalation, it has what we call distributional impacts. It's not everyone feels it the same way. So municipalities get better tax basis, of course, because something is becoming scarce, property, and therefore it raises the tax base. So we need to do adjustments. We need to adjust these things to recognize that things are changing because there are distributional impacts to inflation. But at the same time, inflation will take our province in the best financial position that it has been in 25 years. At the end of this year, our debt to GDP ratio will be probably around 27%, maybe 28. The province says 30, I believe 27, 28. We haven't seen that in almost a quarter of a century. So I'm trying to say, the guy who wrote Over the Cliff, acting now to avoid New Brunswick's bankruptcy, is saying we have the means to invest. This province is probably in a structural surplus position of close to $250 million. And as I said, it's time to start making sure that we are not penny wise, pound foolish, and we start making some investments and we compensate those who are hurt by what's going on. And I'm not the biggest fan of rent control, believe me. What rent control does is that it treats a certain category of people, those who are lucky enough to have an apartment, they're treated differently from the other ones who need to compete with each other to bid up the value of rents elsewhere. But if we're not going to compensate those poor people who can't afford higher rents and unreasonable escalation in rents, then we still have a problem. These people have no voice very often. So we need to recognize that and put our money where our mouths are, and not just say, here, housing industry suffer these dislocations because we're too cheap to invest. Okay, so I can be blunt at times on those things, but that's our reality. We need to make sure that growth, the very reason why we welcome growth in a society, what we learn in the economic textbooks is that it's the Pareto optimality, is that if the growth is sufficient enough to compensate those who are worse off, then you have an increase in your overall welfare. Well, the conditions for that is that you compensate those who are dislocated by growth. And if we don't do that, then I will support temporary rent caps.
Mayor Rogers, in the last round of assessments, we saw in particular the CMA assessment significantly increase. And some of the councils made a decision to give that back to taxpayers. Should we have reinvested that into housing?
So I would say we're a city that gave a little bit back, not as much back as some would want, but instead we made investments in our city that we felt were necessary. Some would be this housing work that we're doing to allow us to waive development fees, to do the affordable housing strategy, to, some of this work, as well as some of the other, we're going to be having to put money into other areas because with growth comes issues that we've not dealt with before, particularly in the cities. We're experiencing a type of criminality that we've not dealt with before. So we try to be reasonable and very balanced in our approach to how to that tax rate. We have a 1.4 tax rate, so we are lower than a lot of the cities. But we also have an increase in costs. We are not immune to inflation. We are not immune to all of the factors that would impact any business, any line of work. We too feel those. However, I am one who agrees with an investment in housing at a municipal level within acknowledging what we do well, what we are able to do well, and we will make those investments. We're not in the world of subsidization. That is a program that is run through social development at the province of New Brunswick. I would encourage them strongly to be investing some of their surplus in more subsidization so that landlords can take advantage of the programs that we run, such as the bonus density zoning. So how that works is we allow more increased density and then there are certain areas where we would ask a landlord, they would have to make a certain contribution. One would be in affordable housing, that they would have so many affordable units. Part of them delivering on those affordable units is getting subsidization, being able to access the programs at the province. Very few have luck. Most say they don't bother because it's not worth it. Many say, or there aren't subsidization, that it's not available. The program isn't available to them. So there's a real opportunity for improvements in that area. But yes, I think we as a city have, like I say, tried to balance those increases in assessments and the increase in tax dollars that we're getting. We're trying to balance that with giving a little bit back, but more so giving back to our community as a whole in areas where we see there is need. One is definitely housing.
Last week I was here in Fredericton and we're doing some volunteer work with an amazing organization, the Gignu Transitional House here in Fredericton. And I met with the executive director and the chair of the board, and they were telling me this story. If you're not familiar with this organization is, It's a transition house for Indigenous women, battered women, and their children, typically who are coming off reserve and seeking shelter, and giving up their community in the process when they leave that reserve. And now, today, even though they make that very brave decision to get out, at the end of it, there's no place to go live because we have such a housing shortage that they often end up, unfortunately, going back. All of our cities are embracing a housing first model to address homelessness, but that's predicated on having enough transitional housing units to be able to manage the growing number of homeless people in our communities, and having the right wraparound services to do that. We're promoting immigration, and we're spending an enormous amount of time, effort, and money to attract newcomers to our province. We're saying, come, please come, please come. And we've been fortunate over the last couple of years to do a lot of work in the immigrants who have come to New Brunswick and to one of our 3 CMAs in particular and end up leaving. It's oftentimes because they couldn't find suitable housing. And it's not necessarily affordable. It's the kind of housing they're looking for, a 3 or 4 bedroom apartment, those kind. And then we're trying to attract, new businesses, foreign direct investment. Investment attraction is such a, yet the big concern is, if we attract them, where will they live, and how will we support them that way? If we don't address this and address it quickly, what's the outcome going to be? Start with you, Willy.
I think things are just going to get worse. I mean, if we don't have, I used to be in the hotel business, and we used to call it heads and beds. If we don't have beds for people to sleep in, then our other problems are going to get worse. We're going to have more homelessness. We're going to have more people needing affordable housing. It's going to lead to more criminal activities that we're seeing now. It's just going to get worse.
George, paint me the picture. What's going to happen?
Well, I think I agree with Richard. If we don't right the ship, some economies, let's call them microeconomies in New Brunswick, some municipalities, they're going to fail. They're just going to fail. The same threat could exist for even the larger municipalities. If you cannot replenish your workforce when you have an aging population, your economy is going to fail. It's that simple.
Richard?
Well, rising inequality, increasing polarization between the rich and poor, growing north-south divide, and a much slower growing economy, and a weaker ability to care for our poor and vulnerable and allow our seniors to age in dignity. Think about a place like Lamec or Caraquet, or those places where 37% of the population are baby boomers, 27%, 28% of the population are age 65 plus. The oldest baby boomers are turning 77 next year. When we're always saying, it's coming, the cliff is coming, well, that's the age where people start needing nursing home services. That's the time when we're saying that the rubber meets the road this year, next year, the year after. We're not ready for any of this. We need labor, we need people to take care of those individuals, and that's directly linked to the issue of housing.
Mayor Rogers?
If we don't have housing, we can't accommodate the growth that we are aspiring to as cities, but we also can't fulfill the existing needs in our cities. And that is the frustration I think all of us feel, whether it be the 20-something-year-old who wants to build a life, wants to buy the house, instead is paying the high rent, which is keeping others from being able to afford the rent. That whole dynamic, if we're not able to get control of this, that dynamic is just going to swirl out of control. And it will create a kind of city that I don't want to live in. I have no interest in living in a city that can't take care of its most vulnerable, that has a lack of diversity because we can't provide a life for people to come here from other countries around the world to come and to build a life here for people who aren't able to age in place, for young people who aren't able to build a home and a life for themselves. That kind of city just does not interest me. It's not what we're all here to do. And I refuse to feel powerless in that. And so I feel that this is our way of trying to grab the reins on this and get control of it. I think though that we do need to be very, very creative in how we do it. And when I talked about the different housing types, you know, maybe they're affordable by design. Maybe if we can just shift our thinking on what a home looks like, we can then create housing for all, and we can do it by building in affordability in every step that we take. But we won't do that unless we all set our minds to it, and that we're all willing to commit what little piece we can to it, whether that be the developer that agrees to affordable units in their development, whether that be, you know, the provincial government that agrees to increase the number of subsidizations and the amount of subsidization. It's ridiculous. Get $60,000 and $70,000 a unit when we know that they're upwards of $200,000 a unit. Where, you know, we all need to just put in our part. And if we all put in our part, I believe that we can make the difference so that it doesn't swirl out of control.
I'm going to open it up to any of the mayors, councillors, and CAOs that are here for any comments. But last to each of you, we'll start with you, Willy. If you were supreme ruler or premier or whatever, what's the one thing you would do differently tomorrow that would help with the housing crisis in New Brunswick?
I've got more than one.
Pick one.
I think the number one thing is property taxation. It's been an issue that I've been fighting for going on 2 decades now. We have a double tax with the provincial and the municipal level. There is some work happening in the next 3 years to reduce it. It doesn't belong in our society. Overtaxing is not the way to go. So that would be number one, is fix it now, not 10 years down the road, or it's only 50% and no plan after that. Just fix it.
George, what's the one thing?
438 units in that affordable rental housing program over 3 years. It's not even close to what's required. So I would increase that substantially.
Vishal?
Well, I would just focus on the labor supply immediately, knowing that we need to scale up dramatically. So therefore, we're going to need to square the labor equation. And honestly, when we're saying we need to double our number of units, I fully agree with you that it doesn't have to be a replica of the housing stock that we have today. We need to get creative about that, but we need to know that if we are to achieve our objectives, we're going to need more people, be they here or building homes for us somewhere else, and they're going to ship them here. I don't know, but we need to recognize that this should be the overarching priority, and then that things can follow from there, in my view.
Mayor Rogers.
I know what I should be saying. I tend to think it is, we need more people. We need the labor, and I'm seeing it. And I know that I should be talking, we need the subsidization. We do need that. We need the land use planning and the zoning. We need all of those things. We need the connectors. So I guess I'm going to do two. I'm going to break the rules. You're
the host, you're allowed.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
Fair.
We need the connector who is willing to take responsibility. We've been thinking that it was going to be the province. I think that a lot of us said that this is a provincial authority province. You're going to fix this through taxation or through ensuring that we get the labor here or through doing the right kinds of subsidization. We've been counting on the province to do it. We need to create an environment where all of us not only have a stake in the game, because we've got a stake, but we take it, we pick up that rod and and we have the authority to use it, and in a very meaningful way. We were talking to the province yesterday about giving municipalities the authority. It makes me a little nervous that we take that authority if they're not giving us all of the money that goes along with it. That makes me quite nervous, but someone needs to be, we need to connect all of us together to resolve this. So I think a level of connectivity needs to occur. However, it's all for naught if we don't have people here building this housing. And I think the greatest threat right now on housing, the building of housing, appears to be we don't have the people to build it. We have a distribution chains supply issue. Thank you for the language. The good thing I've got the Economist next to me. He's giving me the right language. We've got a supply chain issue, but we also just don't have the people building. But we haven't created an environment, I think, that is welcoming enough to new people. And I don't think that we've been promoting the right things in our society to get people to want to do the types of labor that we need.
Willy Scholten, George Cormier, Maréchal Saillant, Mayor Kate Rogers, show them a round of applause. Thank you. Any comments, any questions, any thoughts? Yes, Councillor.
Hey, thank you, Mike. It's great panel. I've been chomping at the bit back there to come up and just to talk. And I'm a big dreamer, a big thinker, and would call myself a housing activist. I swung a hammer for 10 years. I had a little renovation team I run. Now I'm on council. The talk about labor, it appears to me with healthcare and with the construction issue, the housing, you just make trade school free and you make healthcare school free, right? You just take out you decommodify the education system. And that's a play that we've never done. We've never supported that. We've taken shops out of schools. So that's my comment. But I guess a big picture, the only cities like in the research I've been doing on this is, of course, everybody's been looking at it, and I've been looking at it for years. The only cities that have been insulated from the housing crisis are ones that have incredibly active municipal social housing companies or corporations or entities. So you look at Vienna, you look at Yonkers, New York, Montreal has lots of good programming. We had one in St. John. We did the country's first public housing project at Rockwood Court in 43. Back in the 70s, they were big players. We were building thousands of units because we had a sense that we decommodified housing. It was a public good, not a private profit opportunity. So I guess I would love for somebody to kind of wrap all that up. Like, why shouldn't we be trying to seek those elevated municipal housing entities? I know, Kate, you said you guys were going a different route. Mayor Lorden said they're looking at it from a regional perspective. But in the research, it just doesn't seem like anybody else is successful except cities like Vienna and cities like Yonkers who have them, who have taken that profit-making machine out of the industry. So I would love to hear some thoughts on that.
It was interesting. Mayor Rogers talked a lot about cooperative housing, and we actually work with one of the last cooperative housing organizations here in New Brunswick, and it was born out of Co-op Atlantic at the end of its life, and it was actually an organization when Co-op was closing its doors. It gave the division to its employees, and they continued to run it, and they run a number of cooperative housing units across the Maritimes. And the biggest struggle they have, and the reason we've seen such a massive decline in cooperative housing across the country, is that there's no collective good idea. The residents themselves aren't that interested in that collective good, so they don't understand the principles behind it. Communication has been a major issue, and it's caused cooperatives to decline because we've lost that community-minded sense of living, and it's all for one. It's just, everyone out for themselves and trying to live in a very challenging and increasingly challenging society. So the idea of cooperative housing is phenomenal. The application of cooperative housing is very difficult. Mayor Rogers, I know you want to say something.
Well, I want to say something because I'd like to teach the 7 values of cooperativism, right? Because I mean that they're the values that you're talking about that used to be taught. I actually had a university course. I took a university course on it, right? We used to talk about cooperative values. We used to instill those values. I'm not so sure that the world is any harder than it used to be. Like really, we're not fighting a war here in this room. We're not, we're there, like even economically, we cry, I'm not saying that there are not social ills and social issues, but I would say what came out of those social ills and issues was that cooperative spirit. We are now so far removed from it, we forget the value that comes along with that. And one of that would be that we work together to solve a problem. And there's no other problem that I think is more worthy of solving right now than housing. And I do believe that it's potentially a solution, but we would probably have to do a crash course on the cooperative values to remind people what's so good about it. I didn't say, and it was something I did want, what one of the greatest ills is, I would say it is the financialization of housing. That has created a lot of this problem. And I'm not talking about the for-profit developers. Full disclosure, bread and butter was put on my plate from developers. My parents owned apartment buildings, and that's the life but they had 52 units, and those tenants were like family, and they lived there for 30 years. It was a very different time. They literally saw themselves as being in the business of providing housing. So much of our housing market now is premised on the value of just making money, right? And I think that there are lots of landlords who do the balance. I truly do believe that. I do, and you know that, Willy, and I do believe that. But there are also a lot of landlords, I think, that evil players, I don't know how Willy talked about, who literally are just buying up these units just to make money on them. And as a result, it has created this disjointed housing reality. And I think it would be very easy for municipalities just to, not easy, but I can see why municipalities are inclined to step in, but I'm not so certain that that is the solution in this market. It was at the time that a lot of that housing that was built, even cooperative housing in New Brunswick, there was a great influx of federal money that went into those builds. We're not seeing, and then housing authorities would take them over, and it's a different climate now. So I don't know. Our investigation showed that it might not be the solution in this day and age in the Fredericton climate. We instead thought that there was more opportunity for non-market developments to fill that gap. And I stand by that decision. We explored it a lot as a municipality. So we really want to incentivize the non-market developers. And that's why the housing specialists to work with that person to do that.
Any other thought? Richard?
As an economist, we're taught in university to venerate markets and see that whatever outcome comes out is supposed to be the magic of God. But honestly, what fascinates me about a province like New Brunswick is that within 2 years, the conversation has improved so much. 2 years ago, we were barely discussing this publicly, and we need to recognize how much progress in the thinking that has gone along. And honestly, the way I look at it from my perspective is that that capacity of the community to come together is my greatest hope in this province. And honestly, you know, people, we can remove our ideological blinders at time and realize that, look, this is a basic good that people need, that is the linchpin of our social infrastructure, the linchpin of our future growth. And at the last time as a society, we looked at stuff that is basic, such as healthcare or education, we never let it entirely to market forces. We realized that we needed to give markets a nudge here and there. In the case of medicine, we chose to socialize it completely. In the case of housing, I don't suppose that's the appropriate answer, but there still needs to be some sort of a capacity for us to come together at certain moments and say, let's establish our priorities and look at the ways that we can best move forward as a community. And I personally, over the last 18 months, am actually reassured a bit by the fact that we're getting to this issue so fast. It's not that easy to change our mindset so fast, you know, like as a community and public powers and everything. And we had a government, as George said earlier on, that barely 18 months ago didn't even recognize the idea that there was any such thing as a problem with housing. So we're making progress here.
My one thing is that we need to have more conversations like this with the province and the federal government in attendance as well. So look, it's 3:05. Thank you all. And as somebody who drove here from Pointe du Chêne this morning and the hurricane, I have to go back now and bail out my home. So thank you for your input, your continued dedication, your expertise on this issue. We're going to need it moving forward if we're going to address this ever-growing and key problem in moving our society forward. So thanks to everyone. Thanks.